So, starting in verse 31. Now let me set you the scene of what happens here. So, this is at the Last Supper. Jesus and his disciples are together and they're having this last meal together. And as they're having this discussion, Jesus turns to one of the disciples named Peter. His original name was Simon. So he is looking at Simon and he says this. So I'll read verse 31, you read verse 32, so on and so forth. There is another part of this story that we will read during the actual sermon. But we are still continuing our series, a 12-week series on the life of Jesus. Even though this morning's message is different from this message, it's still around the same time period. We want to focus on the trial of Jesus. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the situation here. And the title of the sermon is No Undos, but you don't need one. A lot of times we have this idea of this perceived bravery versus the actual reality when we are living our lives. Andrew might know a little bit about this. What is the saying that everyone says? Everyone has a plan when they go into the ring until you get punched in the nose, right? Yeah, exactly. Everyone has a plan when they go into the ring until they get punched in the nose. And then it's like, what just happened? Something just completely turned upside down. Well, my story is not quite as dramatic, but there is this juxtaposition between the perceived bravery that I had compared to the actual reality. I was around 10 years old. Most of the kids around that age at least know how to dog paddle inside a swimming pool. I did not know how to swim. So my parents that summer said, Jonathan, you're going to have to learn how to swim. So my younger brother and I, we were signed up for swimming lessons. We go to this country club because that's where they offer the swimming lessons. It wasn't our country club. It was just where they're holding swimming lessons, I promise you. So we show up and we're going, and yeah, I was like a good foot taller than all the other kids. Because all the other kids were 5, 6 years old. I was a 10-year-old kid. So they're like, there's that big kid. And I was a bigger son too, so I was like walking around like this. And I was like, why is that big kid here? But anyway, I was going in the water, and so everyone else was like this in the pool, in the shallow end of the pool. And I'm like, you have to sit on top of the water while I can just walk around, see? So I started learning how to swim, and it was all fine and dandy. Then one day we show up, and the swimming instructors were saying, you see that diving board over there? It's really close to the water, but we're going to go over there because we want you to be able to jump in and be able to swim. And I'm like, oh, it's just that much on top of the water, right? It's not a problem. So I'm like, yeah, we're good. We'll be all right. Then I walk over, and I start walking on the diving board, and I'm going, oh my, this is not exactly what I had in mind. And so all the little kids are like, what's wrong with that big kid? Why is he like walking? And I'm just like, as if the water gets closer to me if I walk like this. So there is video of this. I am not showing this video to you. There is video. My parents have it stored away somewhere. It may be black and material. And I'm at the end of the board. I'm like, and the swimming instructors are right under the board, right? They said, it's okay, jump in, you'll be fine. I think I was on that board for a total of like 5 minutes. And finally I'm like, okay, I'll sit on the board, I'll just slip in. So I got one, slipped in. And then I'm like paddling. I wasn't even really swimming, I was like paddling. I'm going to go to the side, and finally got out of the pool. And then after a while, I got used to it, right? But this concept that we're thinking, in our head, we're like, we can do this. But we see that our brain rationalizes things to think that's easy. But my heart shows that I was really scared. Because we see that the heart controls what we want to do. In today's passage, we see Peter's supposed loyalty compared to his public denial, right? He says, I'll follow you, Jesus. I'll go to prison with you. I'll die with you. And then he goes out in a situation where they're not even guards. They're not people who would arrest him. They're just people who noticed him. And he's like, I don't know him. I'm not with him. I don't know him. we see this very dual nature of who Peter is. The human mind is loyal to the thing that it worships, right? And we find many times that happens to be us. Why is that? Because our heart steers our actions. Paul Tripp is a well-known speaker and pastor, and he says that our heart steers our actions. Whether we think we can do something, what is actually in our hearts drives what we do. And so people are hopelessly unable to truly know themselves. We think we know ourselves, but we really don't. What was another phrase I think I heard? It was like, knowing yourself is the ultimate form of aggression. Is that difficult to know about yourself? But if we don't know ourselves, who does? We believe that Jesus does. Jesus truly knows us. He knows our hearts. He knows the problem we have in our hearts. And He gives us the grace that we desperately need. We don't realize that we need it, but He does. So today I want us to kind of walk through the passage that we read and show how we don't get a chance to undo things. Isn't it wonderful when you're typing something or when you're programming or coding something and you're like, well, I didn't mean to actually do that. Control Z. Or, oh, that arrow backwards. Click. Okay. I didn't delete my 5 pages of coding or essay that I need to do. That's a wonderful thing, but we don't get to do that in life. We don't get a chance to undo the things we do in life. But we'll see today in our passage that we don't need that undo button. I'll explain that as we go along. So let's start with the premise that God, our Creator, knows us. Well, what does He know? How much does He know about us? When did He know it? We start off with Luke chapter 22, verses 31 to 34. We see here in verses 31 and 32 that Jesus knew Peter. He knew Peter already. He knew Peter was going to have problems. It says here, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Jesus already knew these things about Simon because He created him. He knew about the fact that his faith needed to be secured. He knew that he was going to turn, that he was going to have difficulty. But when he turns again, he also knew that he would be used by God as a vessel. Strengthen your brothers. But verse 33, Peter, if you don't know much about Peter, come along and let's spend some time reading about Peter. Peter's really good at putting his foot in his mouth, right? Lord, I am ready to go with you, both to prison and to death. I'll die for you. I'll go to prison for you. When you go, take me with you, because I'll be there with you. That's what he's saying. But how did Jesus pray for Peter? That because Satan demanded you, he wanted to sift you like wheat, I pray for you that your faith may not fail. Jesus already knew how to pray for Peter because he knew what Peter would do. Peter didn't know himself. Jesus did. Peter thinks he can handle it. Oh, yeah, I can handle that. I can take that swig and I'll be all right. No, you don't know yourself. Peter didn't know himself either. And we see how that transpires into the actions, where his heart actually lies. We continue on with the passage. We start in verse 54. Look at how Peter is following Jesus. Did anyone notice in verse 54, how was Peter following Jesus?
At a distance.
At a distance. The guy who said before, I want to go with you to prison and to death. When they arrested Jesus, he would have been saying, take me with Jesus. What are you doing? Take me with him. He didn't do that. He stepped back. He did care, because if he didn't care, he would have just like, bye-bye, and just let him go. But he did care, so he did follow, but he was at a distance. He wanted to be safe. Then, as we see the discussion, I mentioned this earlier, he was getting asked questions. But not by officials, right? Who was he getting asked by? The servant girl. Said, this man was also with them. Because it was cold outside, they wanted to warm up, and they wanted to be next to the fire. And as they're gathered together, one of the women are like, aren't you with him? And what was Peter's reaction? He freaks out. He actually freaks out. And then the process says, I do not know him. That's pretty strong, right? It's not, I was with him, but, he's really not all that, so, I'm not with him. He didn't say, he said, I don't know him. There was never a relationship. And then continues on, you're one of them. Man, I am not. And then later on, he's got this, where you're from, how you speak, people can find out where you're from. So, oh, you have a Galilean accent. You're with him, aren't you? And he freaks out. No. In fact, we don't have this here, but in Matthew chapter 26, verse 74, he actually curses. It says that he cursed himself. So he's not just saying, I am not with him, I'm not blanking with him. Right? He's yelling, he's screaming, he's saying, I'm not with this God. And then what happens? We see in verse 16 what happens. As he says, I don't know what you're talking about, the rooster crows. And when that happens, verse 61, Jesus is out in a place where he can see Peter. And he turns and he looks at Peter. You know that time when you do something wrong? You broke a cookie jar, you drop something, you touch something you're not supposed to, and then your parent just looks around the corner and goes, they don't have to say anything. They just look. And immediately something has gone wrong. Same thing. We see here, as Peter hears the rooster crow, he's like, and then he looks and there's Jesus looking right at him. Doesn't say anything. But Jesus is looking at him and he breaks down completely. He weeps bitterly, as it says in verse 62. Peter wanted to follow Jesus. We see that, but he couldn't follow Jesus everywhere that he went. And we see that he falls. He fails. The weakness that he has, he can't follow his Creator, his Lord, and his Master in his own strength. Our hearts do not allow us to do that. We need God's mercy in forgiveness for not wanting to go in that direction. And we need that grace to be able to change our hearts so that we can follow him. So now this is all the sad part of the story, right? We've got, I know about you, says Jesus. Peter's like, no you don't. And then Peter's like, oh crap, he knew everything about me. And I completely betrayed my master. But then the story doesn't end there. There is another part of the story. We go to John chapter 21, verses 15 through 19. I will put it up here so you don't have to look it up. So, I know we're not quite at the resurrection timetable, but I'm going to fast forward a bit. Because the story cannot end here. It does not end here. Jesus dies, he rises again, and he makes a priority to meet with his disciples in Galilee. So, the disciples are like, we met Jesus, great. And then one day, they go, let's go fishing. Because a lot of them used to be fishermen, right? So they're like, let's go fishing again. So they go out and fish. They're not having any success, and they hear a voice calling from the seashore. Have you caught any fish? No. Well, try it over on this side. And they catch fish, and all of a sudden they're like, that's Jesus. That's Jesus. So Peter, the guy who denies Jesus, jumps overboard and goes on shore to meet with Jesus. And everyone else comes behind it. Breakfast is ready. They have their breakfast. And they're having this time together. And then we pick up with this passage. I'm going to read this to you. John chapter 21, starting with verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. he said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." And I'll read the rest in just a bit. So let's talk a little bit about this. Okay, Jesus it's not like he forgot that he asked the question 2 other times. He asked this question 3 times, and we have to kind of break it down. And unfortunately, English, love, only really has one word, love. But most of you likely will know that in Greek, there are different forms of love that are expressed. So the first time when Jesus asked this question, he says, "Do you love," using the word agape. It's a particular type of sacrificial love. Very, very giving sacrificial love. "Do you love me," agape, agapao, "more than these disciples?" And look at how Peter responds. Peter says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love philo. I love you." It's a different answer. He doesn't say, "Yes, of course I love you." He didn't say that. He says, "Yes, Lord, you know." He's submitting to Jesus, that Jesus knows that he loves it. And he doesn't say, "I love you more than these other disciples." Right? Remember the contrast before? Before it was like, "I would die for you. These guys might not, but I will die for you." But here he's like, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. I don't really know if I love you in the way that you asked me the question, agape, but I do love you." Philos. And then Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." He asks and commissions Peter to do something. Feed my lambs. Remember what Jesus said, when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. We see now Jesus commissioning that back to Peter. Second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Notice Jesus changes the question a little bit. He doesn't say, "Do you love me more than thieves?" He just simply asks, "Do you love agape me? Do you sacrificially love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Once again, Peter responds exactly the same. Philos. I love you dearly. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." And then the third time, the question changed actually again. Jesus asks the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love Philos? Me. Phileo. Do you love me?" He changed the question the third time. But even then, Peter is grieved because he is likely reminded at the 3 times that he had denied his Lord and Savior. But then he responds with this, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Peter is grieved by the third question, but yet he fully recognizes Jesus as his Lord, that he knows everything, and he submits to him. He doesn't say, "I'm better than other people." He doesn't say, "I just love you sacrificially." He just says, "I love you dearly. You know that I love you dearly." And he submits to Christ. And Christ lovingly calls him back. This is Jesus' call back to Peter. And so in that love, he calls him back. And then Jesus says something more impressive, starting in verse 18. "Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." So what does Jesus ultimately say here? Peter, you will die for me. You will die because you believe in me. But it says here, to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And then once again, Jesus lovingly calls him and says, "Follow me." This is what our Savior says to us. Even though our hearts are prone to wander, our hearts want to go in different directions, Jesus prays for us because he knows us. And he seeks us and he calls us back, even though we're saying, I don't want it, I don't want it. Jesus still calls us, embraces us, and says, come back. Jesus prayed for Peter. He calls Peter back. And that calling is going to hurt. It required bitter weeping. It required him to be grieved. But ultimately, Jesus gives the grace that we need to seek him and the mercy that we seek in order to receive forgiveness. So we don't need an undo button. We cannot have an undo button. But Jesus doesn't want you to have an undo button. He wants to instead seek him and his forgiveness. And he calls you back because he loves you. Now, I mentioned there was a little comparison I want to make. So I want to make a comparison to another person that was with Jesus during that time. For those of you who were here last week, you may know about Judas Iscariot, one of the 12. He was the one who betrayed Jesus. He's the one who went to the priest and the religious leader and says, I've got Jesus, I want to get rid of him. How much will you pay me? And he was given 30 pieces of silver. What's that valued at? That's the same value as a slave when it's gored by an ox. Not a particularly high price if you think about it, right? Judas Iscariot also referred to him as teacher, rabbi, not Lord, master. Notice Peter did. Judas did not. He sells Christ. And we actually, in Matthew 27, verses 4 and 5, we see Judas saying, oh, I made a mistake. Matthew chapter 27, verses 4 and 5 says this. I'm going to pull it up for you so I can read it for you. This isn't a discussion where once he goes to religious leaders and says, I made a mistake here. And this is what he says, starting in verse 3. Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. Had a very different ending. The difference is, Judas was not repentant. He didn't see the error of his ways when it came to conviction. Judas only felt remorse. He felt guilty, like, oops, I did something wrong. It wasn't a godly repentance. Repentance can only happen in grace, because otherwise we really wouldn't know, right? If you do something wrong, the only way you really know you did something wrong is if someone tells you, right? Otherwise you probably wouldn't know. We see here in Peter it's a little bit different. Peter, he's following Christ, but he puts his foot in his mouth every once in a while. It happens. Sometimes I open my mouth and sometimes my foot comes out of it too. It happens. But, we also see here, I denied Christ. Peter's saying, I don't know Jesus. I don't know him. But when Jesus looked at him, Peter did something very different. Peter didn't feel regret. Peter felt godly sorrow. He wept bitterly because he truly realized what he had done. And he repented. How could he have done that? Because Jesus already was praying for him. He already prayed for him. Verse 32, I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. He would stumble, but his faith would not fail because Jesus prayed for Peter and hung on to him. Christ is the one who protects. He knows what we are capable of, and to be honest, he knows about what we are not capable of. And he prays for us. That's grace. He's praying for us. So the question is, how are you going to respond to this concept of grace? Jesus came, he died for us, and he took on our penalty of sin. The question is, though, as he's praying, is he praying for you? Who is steering your heart? Who is controlling where you're going, where you're walking? Are you feeling brave right now? Are you kind of going off in the wrong direction? Are you saying, I can do this. I can move in this direction. Or are you feeling sorrow instead when you look into your life? As Christ is praying for those he loves, let us take the opportunity to respond to that. For those of us who don't know Christ, who are like, well, yeah, Jesus was a great teacher. No, Jesus wasn't just a great teacher. He is the Son of God who came, died on our behalf, took on our sins, and then rose again, and now freely gives us his grace that we can be with him. We have to see that if he's praying for us, our sin, who is before us, it should convict us. And then we should also accept the grace that he provides to us. Even for us Christians, are we daily seeing the heart that we have, areas where the root is growing in the wrong direction? I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't exactly write this in the sermon here, but over the past week, just getting a chance to work through the book of Romans has really given me an opportunity to see areas where I continue to still struggle. When it comes to seeking Christ first all the time, even in matters of purity, even in matters of desire. And sometimes it almost feels as if my heart has these roots that are caving. You know how tree roots are so ingrained into the ground that if you take the tree out, the ground's completely torn apart? It almost feels that way. When God reveals those areas in your heart, when he's pulling that out of you, it hurts greatly. But if that pain brings godly sorrow and repentance, it's a life-saving opportunity to see and experience his grace. So I pray that you will also be able to experience his grace, to be challenged by what he's giving to you, so that you may live, so that you may be able to receive the embrace of God, of Jesus' loving embrace that he has for you. Let's pray.